Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. It is Friday, April 22nd, 2022. And joining us this morning is our go-to guy from the Washington Informer, James Wright. Good morning, James.
Good morning, and it's a beautiful, beautiful Friday morning.
Isn't it? Well, James, we begin this morning. A California lawmaker says police in Santa Ana have been playing loud, copyrighted music so that video of them on patrol would likely be taken down if it was posted online. Councilmember Jonathan Ryan Hernandez said at a city council meeting that he wants lawmakers to ban the alleged practice after a viral video from early April showed officers apparently blasting loud music on a residential street in Santa Ana while investigating a report of a stolen vehicle late at night. Hernandez is seen in the video interacting with an officer from the Santa Ana Police Department after a different person asked police to stop playing the music. Disney songs such as You Have a Friend in Me from Toy Story and Bruno from Encanto can be heard in the video posted to Santa Ana audits, a YouTube channel dedicated to filming interactions with Santa Ana police uncovered all of this. James, so this is another thing here we got to deal with, right? Now police have found a slick way to get around video.
You know, it's interesting that you bring this particular story up because I was thinking about they're playing those Disney songs of Bruno. The police didn't play LL Cool J's "I'm Gonna Knock You Out" or NWA's, F. This is a family show. F the police. So I just thought that was interesting. I have often, we need to get back. The police needs to get back to helping people and stop all of these crazy little schemes that they have in terms of getting around providing public safety for people, for taxpayers who pay their dollars in order to be protected. When I read this, I was like, what is going on? And why is all this creativity in this particular direction when the creativity needs to be fighting crime, particularly in underserved areas? Now, I can guarantee you this, Stacey, this would not have happened if this were in a wealthier, whiter community. I think both you and I know that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with the advent of video, we didn't always have video. So officers, they use their body cam, but also everywhere you go outside and even indoors, you're being videotaped, right? Somebody's got a cell phone. So this is their way around it, though, because as we all know, if you put up a copyrighted song, YouTube, Facebook, other social media platforms will immediately flag it and remove it.
And that is an ingenious way for them to be not to be held accountable for the actions that they do. Again, I credit the shrewdness of the strategy, but it's just a bad strategy. The council member was right in terms of calling out this practice, and I hope that he follows through in terms of legislation, not only in Santa Ana, but in Sacramento, to make sure that this practice is banned. Stacey, what I don't want to happen is that some other police department somewhere else look at this, particularly in southern states, and say, hey, that's a good idea. We'll pick up on that too. And
no doubt it's spread already, James. There's no question about it.
And my concern is that if you go to the southern states with those conservatives in the legislature, they're going to say, well, and you know how they are. They twist things. But the reality is that if it's against Black people, they're all for it. So that's what I hope this doesn't happen.
Well, and the big question, of course, and many say they know the answer to, I think we know the answer to, what do they have to hide?
Yeah. And that's not only a broader question in terms of this copyrighted music, it's just a broader question in general. This is why so many police unions came out against body cams, and because they have something to hide. When they're supposed to be defending people, they're supposed to be protecting neighborhoods. But we have a lot of bad cops, and you have cops on the line because they're not really mentally fit in order to perform their duties. I hope this serves as an example, and I really hope that Hernandez really pursues this. Not, like I said again, not only in Santa Ana, but also in Sacramento, to put a stop to this.
Hey, James, you ever think about before there was the cell phone video, before there was body cam video, how much did they get away with?
Too much, entirely too much. I'm going to date myself. I'm from Austin, and there was this Austin, Texas. I'm here in DC, but I'm from Austin, Texas. When I was a teenager, a Nigerian by the name of Evan Zakia was killed by the Austin Police Department. He was drowned actually in a town lake with his handcuffs on. And the reason why they couldn't convict the police officers who were white is because they did not have any videotape or cell or anything like that. So those officers got away with murdering Evan Zakia, even though the Nigerian government sent representatives. This is just an example of this particular case, is that the police is trying to get around doing their jobs legitimately. It's wrong. It's got to be stopped, and the people have to speak out.
Yeah, and one of the complaints that the councilman brought up too was this happening late at night in the neighborhood. He says children have to go to school in the morning, people have to go to work. This is just irresponsible, obnoxious behavior.
Yes, and I bet this wouldn't have happened in Orange County, California, or I bet it wouldn't have happened in the wealthy neighborhoods.
Bel Air.
Bel Air, yes. Funny you should mention Bel Air. So yeah, this would not have happened there, and I guarantee you that it would not have taken place. But people in underserved communities have got to come together. They've got to fight this police brutality. In even the weird type of forms is taken as this is an example of that. So they got to do it. They got to do it.
Yeah, and you think about the fact that we're in an era where just 2 years ago, George Floyd was killed.
Yeah.
We also Breonna Taylor. You have all of this as a backdrop, and yet where's the sensitivity?
Sensitivity. Well, remember Rodney King? Remember Rodney King, the situation where he was just the way he was beat up in California, in Southern California. The sensitivity is we seem to be deadening to this type of stuff. We're getting so used to it. It just doesn't mean as much as it used to be. I was just watching television a second ago where the Syracuse police were harassing this 8-year-old boy because he allegedly stole some chips. And as I watch this, Stacey, I have to think, if this was a little white boy, would they be treating him this way? The answer is no. So we have a lot of work to do, but the work isn't on Black people. The work is on white people in order to change their behavior, particularly white police officers, to change their behavior toward people of color in terms of arresting them, etc., but really protecting them also. Yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned the young kid. He was 8 years old, and he is 8 years old, I should say, in Syracuse. They took him off a bike. They handcuffed him.
Yes.
And you could see this kid crying, and it was just a horrible scene. How do you do that? They said like you said, he stole a bag of chips or something like that, but that was horrible.
Yeah, it was horrible. It was horrible and totally unnecessary. They were treating him like he was a murderer. And the way they were manhandling him and, kind of threw him into the cruiser and then it's just like, it seems like the mentality was of the officers. This is just what we do. We're just doing our job. But no, you're not doing your job. You're being insensitive toward a child whose brain has not fully formed yet. And they know about that science because it's been passed around in police departments. We've got to root out these bad police officers who are trying to persuade, trying to masquerade themselves, I should say, good officers, and they're not. Oh, and by the way, we need more minorities in police departments. We need more females in police departments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, James, the state of the air. According to a report published this week by the American Lung Association, almost half of Americans, 137 million people, are experiencing more days of very unhealthy and hazardous air quality than in the previous 2 decades combined. The Lung Association State of the Air report also revealed that 72 million people of color live in counties that received at least one failing grade for ozone and particle pollution. More than 14 million dwell in areas where health officials doled out failing grades on all 3 measures. James, we are being polluted. The air is polluted, particularly in communities of color.
Well, I definitely know this because, and by the way, that was an excellent article on the web in the Washington Former's website that you did on this particular topic. It was excellent. When I read your article and as we discussed this, I'm thinking about here in DC in the Benning Road. You have a Pepco plant right off of the Anacostia River in Benning Road. And you know that is a predominantly Black community. And for years, that particular plant was just spewing all type of toxic whatever into the air. And for many years, many people in that area did not really respond because they didn't know they were affected by it. That was the main thing. And those that did not have the political power and the political, they had the will, but not the political power to shut down that plant. Eventually, that plant has been neutered. But the point is that the damage is done. And it's also kind of funny, you know, we're talking about this, Stacey, because the man who really launched environmental justice is the man who runs NNPA now, which is Dr. Benjamin Chavis. And he is the guy who, Dr. Chavis was the one that woke up Black people and others to the fact that these communities of color tend to have these toxic waste. They tend to have bad air. The water is crappy. And even now, you know, you talk about Flint, Michigan. I bet there are a lot of Flint, Michigans out here because you turn out the water you turn on, it turns brown and it doesn't taste good. And it was Dr. Ben Chavis in the 1980s who let us know about this. This is not a cause. The environment has not really been a cause that Black people have embraced. Yet it should be embraced by African Americans because we are the ones who are suffering from it the most. Yet because we came so late to the game in terms of doing this, there's really not there's a whole lot we can do. Yeah. There's a whole lot we can do, but we just have not done that. But I commend the American Lung Association for their program for this state of the air. We need to know this, but the next thing we need to do, community activists and our leaders on these city councils and in these states, they need to move forward in order to solve these problems. And once again, a lot of the problems are in the South. Louisiana is one of the environmentally dirtiest places in the country.
Yeah. The report did look at America's exposures to 2 types of air pollution: ozone, also called smog, and particle pollution, commonly called soot. The American Lung Association has issued the state of the air for 23 years using data analyzed from official air quality monitors. We have such a problem with this environment. And you mentioned earlier about Dr. Chavis with environmental racism, a term he coined early in the 1980s. What else can the government do, James?
Well, one thing, Stacey, is culturally, and let me explain. People make jokes about Los Angeles being a smoggy city, and they make jokes about it. That is not a joke. That's very serious that Los Angeles, a city with a lot of people of color and a lot of people in general, has bad air. That's not a joke. And then you have we have become in many situations, people of color, we're just kind of used, I hate to put it this way, but used to it. And not only do we kind of become used to it, we just sort of like justify it by saying, well, that's just the way it is here. No, it does not have to be the way it is. Los Angeles does not have to be the smoggiest city in the country. Our neighborhoods don't have to have these crazy smells and these toxic plants there located. I'm here in Sea Pleasant, Maryland, right outside of DC, and a few blocks from me, Metro has placed toxic waste in a property because we have a metro station nearby. That's where they put the toxic waste there. Now we know about it and we think it's terrible, but we're not doing anything about it. This is why we have to get upset and angry. And that here in the DC area, this would not happen in Bethesda, and it certainly would not happen in Fairfax County. And hey, if you want to talk about class, Stacy, it wouldn't happen in Mitchellville or Bowie. So that's why we have to get involved and put a stop to this environmental racism, which is what the report is really talking about.
Yeah, it really is. The NMPA's Claudette Perry says, James, do you remember Damu Smith, who became, I should say, DC's main advocate for environmental justice? Do you recall?
Yes, I do. I do. For the Sierra Club, was he the one with the Sierra Club? But many of these environmentalists, they belong to all of these clubs, the conservation, the Sierra Club. Yes, but we need more of them. And we also need more of our minority lawmakers, whether it's the DC Council or the Congressional Black Caucus, to become more sensitive to this particular field in terms of environmental justice, environmental racism. A lot of times we just don't want to deal with that because in the earlier days, it was white folks' business. But now it's kind of too complicated because we're getting so wrapped up, and justifiably so, in police brutality, economic development, etc. We're not really focusing on environmental racism the way we should.
Yeah. Again, Ms. Perry notes that upon his death, Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton attempted to introduce the Damu Smith Environmental Justice Bill. It's about Greenpeace, right? He was an original, she says, who worked with Dr. Chavis. No surprise there, right, James?
Yes. A small community of environmental activists in that regard.
So, James, let me ask you this too. I mean, you've been reporting on this. James reports on everything, y'all, but you've been reporting on this as well. Why hasn't it been taken nearly as seriously as it should? I mean, we are reaching danger points with the quality of the air, the environment.
This is just my opinion. I think that progressive Black leaders and their white liberal allies have been so focused on issues such as police brutality, employment rights, voting rights, that they haven't really looked into environmental racism as much because those particular issues require so much energy. The thing is that really they're all a part of one agenda, and they should be all a part of one agenda, and they should be equitable in terms of the agenda of the NAACP, Leadership Conference for Civil Rights, etc. And our leaders right now, Stacy, because environmental racism is kind of a scientific thing, they're more comfortable dealing with the legal arguments and the legal issues around voting rights and civil rights, employment rights, economic development, as opposed to getting into like the chemical scientific weeds of environmental racism, that sort of thing. That's the reason why.
Yeah. So in other words, we deal with so much on a daily basis that important things like this take a backseat to other things. And that is unfortunate. You are absolutely right. James, a newly published report reveals that 200,000 children have reportedly lost parents to COVID-19. And as young orphans attempt to cope with such tragic losses, Many grandparents have assumed the role of primary caregiver. The COVID Collaborative Coalition estimated that about 167,000 American children lost a parent or primary caregiver to the pandemic, with much higher rates among communities of color. Researchers at Imperial College in London put the number of children who have lost one or both parents at nearly 200,000. And Generations United, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit whose goal is to improve the lives of children, youth, and older adults, reported that before the pandemic, 2.6 million children already live with their grandparents. So grandparents, James, as always, have stepped up to the plate.
Yes, that is unfortunate. Let me make a quick point, and I think you pointed this out in your article in the Informer, which you wrote about this too. This trend was already taking place before the pandemic. You're having grandparents raising their grandkids. The days of just going over to grandma's house on the weekends or maybe once or twice a month, that's now becoming quite commonplace. And then this pandemic set in, and people were unprepared for it. Many of the people who were vulnerable to it happened to have kids, and then they die and or become severely debilitated, and then the grandparents have to step in. And so this is something that's been growing anyway. And I'll just repeat what I just said. The pandemic only showed how acute it is and how things have gotten worse. What we need, yeah.
Oh, go ahead, James.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, you know, you have to tip your hat off to grandparents who are raising their grandkids. I know of a personal example of this, and I know she's not going to watch this show, but because she's not in this universe, but Adeline Davis, who is the grandmother of Vernon and Vontae Davis, who played in the NFL. She unfortunately, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but she had to adopt Vernon and his 5 siblings because of some situations with her daughter, Jackie, and I know them personally. So I've seen this situation up front, and grandparents raising grandkids it's just only become more acute since COVID-19.
Well, and James, you think about too, they're grandparents who need care themselves. And so this really complicates things. And we're talking about too, the reports that have come out, 3 different reports show that it's mostly, once again, people of color.
Yeah. And I go back to Miss Davis again. She worked as a domestic here in Washington, D.C. And, you know, taking on 6 kids when you're a retired domestic and you're only getting your Social Security, you know, that's quite something. And these kids are growing and they're in D.C. public schools. You know, the D.C. Council is waking up to this problem, and they have several bills that aid grandparents raising their grandkids. I'm not concerned about DC. Stacey, I'm not concerned about DC. I'm not concerned about Maryland. What I am concerned about is some of these other states who really don't understand what the real problem is, and whose idea of thinking about grandparents is that grandparents are wealthy. They're getting this money, they own property, so they can take care of their kids no matter what color they are, which is totally not true. And so I think we really need public policy. We need the Congress to step up and do something to help aid grandparents raising grandkids.
Yeah, and you have cases, again, like I said, grandparents have their hands full anyway, but then you hear so much about elder abuse and they deal with so much, James. You know, what as a community can folks do? We always say what can the government do, and who they should be doing something, but what can the community do?
Well, I think the churches need to step up now. And yes, I'm part of the choir that says the church needs to do more. Now, what the church needs to do more, I don't know. But in this particular situation, this is definitely what needs to happen. Churches can offer aid to these grandparents. The churches can offer a sanctuary to these grandparents. These are older people. They don't have the strength that they had 20 or 30 years ago to raise their kids. So the church can step in and, maybe provide some sort of daycare for these young people while these grandparents get some sleep and rest. Not only that, businesses can step up. These businesses, and you don't need the government to do this. Businesses such as CVS or Rite Aid can offer discounts for grandparents in terms of certain products and things like that. Schools can make a difference by extending their daycare program and making sure that in the curriculum it is understood that grandparents have the same rights or should have the same parental rights in terms of their grandkids. And so and you're right, Stacey, it's just not on the government. Other entities can step up to help these grandparents because they really, really need help. And I'm afraid to say this, but this is going to become more and more of a problem. And the pandemic only made it more acute.
And James, long time saying, "Great with gray hair comes wisdom." Mm-hmm. My hair is white; it's not gray, so there's no wisdom here. But
I don't have no
hair. You have no hair. But in all seriousness, though, James, there are also downsides to grandparents raising young kids, isn't it?
Yes. The downside is that they don't have the energy that they had a few decades ago when they were raising their kids. The other thing is that these kids are different. Well, not really, but they have different circumstances than when they were when the grandparent was raising their kids. And so as a result of that, there are cultural differences. We are not dealing with a situation, Stacey, where the grandkids are only coming by once or twice a month. They're there every day. And so they have to be fed. The kids have to be fed every day. They have to be mentored every day. Their clothes need to be washed every day. And so it's a really, really taxing situation for a lot of grandparents who thought that maybe my responsibilities for raising kids was done when Tyrone and Susie left at 18 and got a job and went to college. So yeah, it's and like I said, this is something I know up first and up hand. And you really have to commend these people for taking this on, but they do need help.
And James, you said, folks up close, firsthand. What are the challenges for the children?
The children, oftentimes when the kids are talking to their grandparents, the grandparents come from an era of you do what the teacher says, you do what the police says, no matter how racist, you respect authority. Whereas kids nowadays question authority, and they do it in a different manner. And as a result, there's that tension, there's that schism between the grandkids and the grandparents because they're living in two different worlds and two different viewpoints in terms of that. And of course, you're talking about the daily stuff, Stacey. Why are you coming home at 10 p.m. on a school night? Why are you wearing that dress? Why do you have that earring on you? Cultural things. And so they have to come to a medium in terms of how they deal with each other like that. And that's really what the problem is. It's a cultural and an age difference.
Well, we salute the grandparents out there who continue to carry the water for all of us. So we are thankful for them. And James, don't forget, coming up in June, the NMPA's annual summer convention. This is a special one, though. It's in New Orleans. 195 years of the Black Press will be celebrated. Beautiful hotel. Everybody's welcome. You can go to www.nmpa-events.com to register and really get a great rate for a great hotel and a great experience. There's also, if you go to that website, you can also buy tickets to the Legacy Awards and other features that we'll have there. But the Legacy Awards, Dr. Chavis announced yesterday that the great Stephanie Mills will be performing and headlining there for the Black Press of America. So join us in New Orleans. Again, it's www.nmpa/events.com. Thanks again, everybody, for joining. Let it be known. It is Friday, so make it a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.